Hey guys, welcome back. So I saw this on Twitter regarding a new trend that's been going on, and that is people replicating what the House of Representatives are trading, along with what the Senate is trading as well. So I wanted to analyze their transactions, which led me to another site that keeps track of these trades. Not only can we see what the House is trading, but also what the Senate is doing. So I read through the documentation and came up with an R script, which will allow us to get the transactions for the House along with the Senate. So I'm going to go ahead and post this URL in the R script itself in case you want to read through this. But if we go to the actual script, we will either do one of two things. Either we will get the most recent transactions, or we can get all the transactions. So after we load up our required packages, I'm going to go ahead and read XML. And what this is actually doing is getting the list of all the available files. So if we take a look at this hyperlink, it is actually referencing this. So I'm going to go ahead and read this XML to get the file names. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to save these in temp. Now you can go ahead and get all the file names by replacing this 1 through 10 with 1 through the length of XML children. But I'll show you how to get all the transactions in a later function, which is much quicker than this. But first I'm going to read the first 10 file names. And I do that by running this following block. So I'm going to store these in get names. So since these are saved in descending order, at the very top of the list we'll get the most recent file. So I'm just going to go ahead and extract the very first file name. So before we read in the data, we need some helper functions. And all these two functions are doing is just converting or helping with the conversion of HTML to character encoding. So I'm going to go ahead and run these two lines. So now to get the house trades, we use this function called house trades. And if we take a closer look at this function, we're going to build our URL and we're going to pass in the file name. I'm going to read JSON and save that into today. I'm going to row bind all the transactions and save this as a data frame. And then I'm going to test whether or not this data has any transactions. So if the number of rows in my data frame is greater than 0, I'm going to go ahead and do the following. So all this block is doing is just formatting so that it's more presentable. And some of the columns we have are the name, the report date, what district representative belongs to, the source, who transcribed it, and the amount, the transaction date, and the report date. All other columns in this data frame do not need any formatting, which include the ticker along with any comments or notes. So after I format this data frame, I'm going to go ahead and row bind and save that into data. Otherwise, if the data does not contain any transactions, then I'm just going to return null. And finally, just return this data frame, whether it's null or if it has any transactions. So fairly straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and run this function. And I'm going to go ahead and also pass in our file name for the most recent transactions. So if we take a look at trades, we have 163 rows or 163 transactions. So let's take a look at some of these columns. So sometimes for owner, we have either self, and I've also seen joint. We also get the transaction date, the ticker, the description, along with the transaction type. So there's 3 possible scenarios, either a full sale, a purchase, or a partial sale. We also get the amount. So the transaction amount was somewhere between $1,001 to $15,000. We also have whether or not this qualifies as capital gains over 200. And I think this column only pertains to sales. And we also get the name of the representative. So we'll include the name of the representatives for this report date. So if we scroll down, so we do have 2 representatives for this report date, but it appears that Cindy was the one trading the most. We also get the district these representatives belong to, along with the source, in case you actually want to read where this data is coming from. So this will take you to a government link, and you can view the transactions there as well. And finally, we give credit to the person that put this together, which is Timothy Karambat. So again, if you run the first couple of lines, you will get the most recent trades. But now let's go ahead and pull all the transactions. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. All right, so to get all the house trades, you don't need to insert anything as a parameter. I'm just going to pass in a link, which is a different link that will pull the data much quicker. I'm going to go ahead and read JSON and also do some formatting. So I'm replacing some NAs and formatting some additional columns. So it's a very short function. So let's go ahead and run these two lines. So if we take a look at all the transactions, so this is very similar to the data frame that has the most recent trades, except we get a few additional columns here, which include the disclosure year, but everything is essentially the same. So the next thing to check was to see what the house was actually buying. So in our script, I have a function called getRanking, which I'm just going to pass in that data frame, and you could subset from year or date. So if we open up this function, I'm going to subset my data frame to only include that date range. I will then extract the unique tickers found in that data frame or in that date range, and I'm going to go ahead and do a summary by returning 3 different columns. So I want to get the purchases, the partial sales, and the full sales by ticker. And we also had a few transactions that were exchanges, but for the most part it'll fall within these 3. And then the ranking system, I'm going to go ahead and give purchases 1 point. I'm going to go ahead and deduct half a point if they're partial sales, and I'm going to multiply it times -1 if they are full sales. So after I add the score, I'm going to go ahead and return the data frame in descending order by its score. So I'll explain the scoring system once we have the table. So if we minimize this function, and I'm going to do year to date, so January 1st, 2021 to present. And if we take a look at the ranks, so for any ticker that has 2 dashes, I believe the majority of these were bonds that were traded. But if you focus only on the stocks, we see that ticker MMP has the greatest score with 29 purchases and no sales whatsoever. The second on the list was Berkshire with 30 purchases or 30 transactions, 5 partial sales and 7 full sales, which gives it a score of 20.5. So again, it's 30 points minus 2.5, since this 5 is given a weight of -0.5, and then I also deduct 7 points, which gives us a total of 20.5. And out of curiosity, I checked some of these, and it does appear that the majority of the things that they are buying, such as MMP, have a very large dividend, which I believe MMP has a dividend yield of 8%, I believe. So one can only speculate on what they are doing, but it's very interesting to see that there's no sales and only purchases for this ticker. All right, so for the next part of the script, I'm going to go ahead and subset my transactions and only extract stocks. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the bond transactions and subset my transactions to this year, 2021. So I'm going to go ahead and run these 2 lines. And also for this next part, I'm going to go ahead and use my database to get prices. But you can check out my video on how to build your database. And for this, I'm using the SQLite database, and all the stock data is coming from TD Ameritrade. So for these 3 lines, I'm just formatting some dates so that I can go ahead and call my database. And I'm also going to specify the max date or the last date in my database. Now to get the stock data out of my database, I have 2 functions. So for this first function, I'm just going to pass in the ticker I need data for. Day to day is the name of my database, and date will return the stock price for this date. So if we take a closer look at this function, I'm going to go ahead and connect to my database. I'm going to send a query to extract the price on that date, and I'm going to return it as numeric. So I'm going to go ahead and run this function. So the next function is similar, except I have 1 extra parameter, which is the max date available in my database. And what this function will do is it's going to calculate the returns for a 1 day, 5 day, 1 week, 2 week, 1 month, 3 month, 6 month, and 1 year after the actual transaction date for each of the stocks. And it will actually return the stock prices along with the return. So in this section, I'm just going to create a date sequence from the date of the transaction to a year from the transaction date. And then I'm going to subset the date sequence to only include business days or trading days. And then I get the dates for these periods. I then get the entry price, and then I establish a connection with my database and pull out the prices for the 1 day, 5 day, 1 week, 2 week, and so on. So after I get the prices, I will go ahead and bind all the prices together. And if we didn't get any errors with pulling the prices, I'm going to format the column names. But if we did get any error with the pricing, I'm just going to go ahead and return the buy price for all of the periods. And that's just something in my database where I couldn't find the price, but it didn't happen too often. So that's the good thing. And then I calculate the simple return or the holding period return for each of these periods. And finally, this function will just return the data frame with the prices along with the returns. So if we go ahead and minimize this function, I'm going to go ahead and run it as well. So the following function will get the performance for each of the stocks. So I'm passing in stocks, the name of my database, and the very last date on my database. And we'll also call these two functions. So I'm going to go ahead and split the transaction amounts. So if you recall, if we take a look at all, I'm going to go ahead and split these amounts and convert these as numeric. So I'm going to create two columns so we can do some calculations with the amount. So again, I'm just splitting that column and then merging that with my stock column. And I also don't need all the columns. So here I have specified what columns I want to extract. So I'm going to go ahead and subset that to only include purchases. I'm going to get the entry price for each of the transactions, and I'm going to go ahead and row bind that with my stock data frame. So for some of these, it returned NA for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was that either these are mutual funds or cryptos, and the other reason was that the person that transcribed this didn't accurately represent the tickers. So all I'm doing here is I'm separating the NAs from the complete cases, and then I'm going to go ahead and fix some. So some of the ticker names change or were misspelled. So I had to manually go through these and change them. And then after I changed the tickers, I tried again to get the stock price or the entry price, and I was able to find a couple of more. But for the cases where they were cryptos or mutual funds, I did not have that data in my database, so it returned NAs. But the ones that I was able to get, I row binded with my stock data frame. And then after that was a little bit more complete, I called my get stock function, which returned the performance. And after that's done running, I row bind the performance and combine it to the stock data frame. And what this function will return is the complete data frame with the performance of each of the transactions and also the NAs. So if we minimize this function, I'm going to go ahead and run it, and then we'll go ahead and test this function. So after it's done running, I'm going to go ahead and extract the complete cases, which include all the buys. And if you want to take a closer look at the ones that returned NA, then you can also extract that list and save it as a data frame. So I'm going to go ahead and do both. So let's take a look at the good data or the buys. All right, so we were able to get close to 2,000 rows or 2,000 transactions year to date, and we have a total of 25 columns. So we have the transaction date, the disclosure date, the ticker, the asset description. These are all purchases, the representative, along with the split amount, the entry price, and again, this is just the closing price on the transaction date, and the stock prices for several periods, anywhere from 1 day to a year. If it hasn't been a year, it will just return the most recent price in my database, along with the performance. So the last couple of columns here, you see that we get the performance if we were to hold 1 day after the transaction day, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, 6 months, and also a year. So now that we have this down, we can actually summarize this by ticker. So if we go to our script, I'm going to go ahead and reconcile by ticker. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in all the buys, and what this function is doing is it's just going to summarize the performance by each of the tickers in my buy data frame. So it'll show the number of transactions, the first purchase date within my date range in stocks, the very last purchase date. I'm going to go ahead and use the amounts column to get the average estimated purchase amount. And I'm going to use the amount and divide it by the stock price to get the estimated quantity or the number of shares. I'm going to also summarize and get the average purchase price for each of the tickers. And I'm also going to calculate the average return for each of these tickers. It's also going to combine the minimum price paid, the maximum price paid, and the last traded price in my database. I'm going to go ahead and combine everything and return that data frame. So let's go ahead and minimize this function and run it by passing in buys. So if we take a look at that data frame, we have 589 different entries, and we get a nice table showing the ticker, the very first purchase, the last purchase, the number of transactions, the estimated dollar amount, along with the estimated shares owned. So I used the estimated dollar amount to get the VWAP price paid, and this is just an estimate. And it also returns the minimum price paid, the maximum price paid, and where it's trading at currently according to the last price in my database. So for each of these tickers, I returned the performance in several periods, and we do see that the further out we hold, typically it means a larger return. Not always, but for the most part it is. So now that we have all these purchases, I'm going to do the same but for all the sells. So again, I'm going to reconcile all the sell trades and return all the sales, which includes the partial and full sales. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So after that's done running, I'm going to go ahead and use all the transaction data to get the net activity. So again, I'm just going to pass in all buys and all sells. So if we take a closer look at this function, I'm going to only extract the tickers that these two data frames have in common, and I'm going to go ahead and calculate the net activity, so all the purchases minus the sales, and I'm going to return the net dollar volume, the net shares, the VWAP change, and also the percentage change. So let's close this function, and we'll go ahead and run it by passing in all buys and all sells. So if we take a look at net activity, so for each of the tickers, we get the number of transactions, whether they were sales or purchases, the estimated dollar amount for the buy side, along with the sell side dollar volume, the estimated number of shares bought and sold, along with the average price paid, along with the average price sold. We get a net dollar amount of 0 with an estimated number of shares of half a share, and for BlackRock in this case. The point change, so there was a 10-point change, and in percentage terms, that's a 1.28% change for this particular ticker. So if we rank this from highest to lowest, we see that there's a 92% change for Viacom. So it looks like there was only one buy transaction and 16 sells. And from the looks of it, all these transactions got out before it crashed, which kind of explains why there's a substantial number of sells and relatively low buy transactions. And you can see that by the average price paid and where the average price sold. We can also calculate the net long, which is just similar to this very first function, except that we only include those tickers not found in our sells, which gives us our net long positions. So if we run this line and we take a look at net long, so there's currently 247 tickers that have not been sold yet. And let's do a rank by dollar volume. So we see that we have 29 transactions for this particular ticker with an estimated dollar volume of 2 million. The average price paid is $45.96. The last price was $47.32, which gives us a return of close to 3%. But for this particular stock, as I mentioned previously, it just has a high dividend yield, and it's been trading sideways this year. And if we rank by percent, and we see that this ticker MUR has the greatest percentage change. So it looks like the average price paid was only $12.24 and is currently trading at $29.51, but not that many transactions. Alright, so finally, let's take a look at the very last function, which will return the best investor from the house for this year. So I'm going to pass in my stock data. I'm going to do a bit of formatting and also compare their returns to the SPY ETF, and I do that by subsetting the unique names of the representatives, which is done in this very first line, and then I go ahead and extract the returns for each of their transactions year to date. So let's go ahead and close this out. So I'm going to go ahead and run this function and get the table of the ranks. Alright, so let's take a look at this table. Alright, so this is summarized by representative. and ranked highest to lowest. So our first place candidate is Andrew with a portfolio return of 45% versus the S&P year-to-date return of 1873, which they are outperforming by roughly 26%. The state they belong to, the estimated dollar buys, and the estimated dollar sells, which gives us a net activity of negative 24,000. So it looks like he's selling more than he's buying. And if we take a look at his buys, we just have 3 transactions. So I'm using the mid amount to calculate the average return. And since there's only 3 transactions, I give it an equal weighting of 33%. So again, these are all just estimates. And it looks like it wasn't able to find this ticker, which appears to be a mutual fund. But I manually checked this, and this is also in the positive. And if we take a look at his sales, so there's a lot more sales as we previously mentioned. So we do have a couple of mutual funds, and we do have 2 actual stocks. So for the sales, since I don't know when he actually bought this, I just returned the transaction price the day he traded, which is this date here. And we actually want to see negatives in this column, since that would mean that the stock actually ran up after he sold, which happened to Bank of America here. So he sold at 39.18, but it ran up to 44.34, which he missed out on roughly 13%. All right, so let's see where Nancy is at. So for Nancy, she takes in the 5th spot this year. She's still outperforming the S&P. It looks like she's buying more than she is selling. And if we take a look at her buys, so mostly tech stocks. And if we take a look at their return, all of these are in the green. And if we take a look at her sales, it looks like there's just 1 sale. I couldn't find this ticker because I think this company actually got bought out or merged, so it's not in my database, but it was a fairly substantial trade by looking at the mid amount. So this concludes the video, guys. I really hope this information was useful. I'll go ahead and post the link in the description area where you can get the house trades along with the Senate trades. I'm not going to go ahead and do the Senate trades, but I'll leave you the script so you can analyze this further. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next video.